Hello. Oh, hello, puppy. Happy Wednesday. Enlarged kidney. Oh, kidney problems can be. We're talking to Books, Brews, and Booze, whose kitty Precious is having some kidney problems. Kidneys can be tricky with kitties. Hopefully, I don't know, lots of water for the kitty, whatever the vet says. Hi, Sharkies. Happy Wednesday. Oh, I'm a little tired today. I did not really sleep last night. I moved Puppy's bed over to this side so that when he goes to nap in there, he'll be easier to see. Um, I had a bit of a nap myself for an hour or two during the day today, but but yeah, so I'm running a little low on sleep. Mm. Farmos and I have a somewhat big day tomorrow. Lots of driving. We're gonna go see a play. Um, yeah. Oh. Also, today is our friend Mr. Chip Alex's birthday. I need to make sure I send him a happy birthday message. Doing that right now. But I'm hanging out with him on Saturday. Also, mute my phone while I'm at it. I ran D&D on last Saturday. Right? Saturday? I think it was last Saturday, yeah. For my group, our Curse of Strahd game, which was a very strange session. Uh, Hopefully, nobody minds some. I'll try to keep it somewhat low details on the spoilers, but basically, all of all of the characters in the party have all found themselves uh, like chemically or magically or something addicted to these pies that give them very nice dreams when they go to sleep at night, but also make it so that they can't be woken up until they've gotten a full 8 hours of sleep. Um, and then if they stop eating the pies, they start going through withdrawal. So, um, yeah, the party has been failing. Like, just everybody had been failing the Constitution saves versus these pies that they all found themselves addicted to. Um, a couple of them passed in this last session, so it was less severe than it had been in previously. And then they all ended up in basically locked in a small room with this undead type that was regenerating hit points almost as fast as the party could deal the damage. And this creature was crawling up the walls and grappling people, and it was 4 versus 1. There were 4 party members versus this one creature, but the fight went on for it was more than 10 rounds of combat. Um, which, like normally I would kind of expect. Oh, did I lag out there? Probably just my stream lagging. Okay. Normally I would expect the action economy, 4 versus 1 to sway the whole fight in the party's favor, but the regeneration, plus they didn't know about the damage resistances the monster had. Yeah, as Robot Kyo says, Bane ran out. Yeah, the party is all at 3rd level right now, and I think it's sort of a strange composition because we have a cross-class cleric fighter who is our most sort of, even then he's not really specialized in close combat, and for most of the fight when he did have to do close combat, he was using a dagger without any, it was just 1d4 damage. Then we've got a druid, a bard, and a warlock. So very caster heavy, but still at a relatively low level, so the casters aren't that powerful yet. So I think that was part of it. Part of why it was tricky. And yeah, that fight went on for quite a long time. Because Bane lasted for close to 10 turns, right? Like, I think Bane actually ended a little early because Robot Kyo's character got dropped below 0, well, dropped to 0 hit points by a bite on the neck. Is anyone else? My stream on my end keeps buffering over here. Is my upload okay? It says it is. I've been fine? Okay. Okay. It's probably just confused. So yeah, that was a messy fight. And in the end, the creature, the undead, escaped from the room they were all in because he was kind of trying to get away from the beginning, and escaped the chamber they were all kind of shut in together with, and got outside. And so that's shortly after that, as they were kind of searching for him outside, is where we ended the session. That was a long fight. It was interesting. I kind of appreciate the way that it worked out. I think it was a little frustrating at times because things weren't going right. But I appreciated at least that it was a fight that did kind of go back and forth a fair amount. It felt, somewhat like actually balanced, like it could have swung either way without it being a pure numbers thing, like a force of numbers thing. Like, the enemy, there was only one enemy. It wasn't, an enemy plus 8 bats or whatever, like, some slimes. No backup, just the one enemy. And, I didn't fudge any dice rolls, anything like that. So it all just kind of like surprisingly close. And in the end, nobody died this time. It could have if the enemy were not focused on escaping. See, that's a thing. Running a game, I find it's easy to fall into the trap of having enemies that, like, having bad guys that don't have goals or thoughts and just will fight to the death, and that's it. That's their only objective. Fight starts and it doesn't end until the bad guys or the good guys all die. And that's kind of boring to me and doesn't feel right. And if that had been the case, if this enemy had been willing to just stay there and fight to the death, it could have gone either way. Or it could have been, the enemy gets killed at the cost of some of the player characters. it could have gone that way. So, but I think, that wasn't the enemy. Like this, that wasn't this creature's goal. It wasn't to kill at the cost of its own life. Um, and it was kind of scared from the beginning. Robocchio thinks it felt quite tense. Yeah, that's good. That's definitely. I mean, it felt very. I think it was a mixture of tense plus sort of goofy because just it was so weird. There were so many weird things in that whole session. Players grappling with each other over the pies. And yeah, the beginning of that fight. See, that's the thing. Like right now, the party's so caster heavy that you can start off really strong, but because they're lower level casters, you don't have that much endurance. So if the fight doesn't end immediately, your potential goes down. Because at the beginning, that creature could not do anything between Bane and um, disadvantage from being like frightened and things like that. Just hey, bear, slightly stupid bear. We're just talking about the D&D session I ran last Saturday. Before we get into our book, we're reading Wyrd Sisters by Sir Terry Pratchett. We're not very far in. It's a very entertaining book if you are not familiar with it, about witches, and it's definitely got some parallels to a certain Scottish play. Intentional ones, definitely. But yeah, so right, as Farmos was saying, the enemy they were fighting had weird abilities, and their stamina, the party's stamina, was tough. Was not like at its peak, which probably wasn't helped by a variety of things. Like the druid had already used a wild shape that day, at least one. Yeah, just one. Still had one left. I think the cleric maybe blew a higher level spell slot on like detecting undead, maybe. Yeah, not a lot of damage spells like Farmos is saying. A lot of debuffs though. Like for the first quarter of the fight, this this enemy just like it was like the party was having trouble. They were doing some damage to it, and it was just missing everything in return. But then once the debuffs started to wear off through one method or another, then it started to get scarier. But yeah, overall, um, some stress in that encounter, and a lot of just goofy laughing at the weird things that were happening. Yeah, so it was a good time. We have not yet scheduled our next session. I don't think. What is stuck? Was that a feather or something? Something off of a hat, I think. Oh, there it is. Yeah, a scrap of feather in my hair. Oh yeah, and we had cupcakes. We had gluten-free cupcakes. Back of my hair is so flat right now. So, how about this book? The last time we read it, the witches went to see a play, went to the theater. You see a puppy? This guy? This guy right here? Also, a kitty. This is Sesame, the kitty, visiting because, you know, witches. Yeah, yeah. Ben knows that he is puppy. Hey, you a sleepy puppy? Are you winking at me over there because you're sleepy? I don't know if you can see that he's kind of a little winky right now. Oh, big yawn. um, Slightly Stupid Bear says, hi, puppy. Yeah? Alright. Message relayed. Yeah, so the witches went to the theater, and afterwards they met the troupe manager, Mr. Vitoler. And then we also saw at the Castle Lanker the, what is he, Duke? Felmet and Lady Felmet were learning about the witches in the villages and how they don't pay taxes and they're, you know, allowed to do their business. All that nonsense. And they weren't thrilled about that, especially since they believe that I believe that they believe that the witches have a certain royal baby who they kind of want dead. So, the stage is no longer set because the play's over, but that's where we're at. Why don't I get into it, huh? I'm pretty sleepy, so I'll probably only go for 45 minutes or so, I think. I'm gonna get to sleep a little earlier tonight, considering I didn't sleep last night. Oh, puppy heard something. All right. Where we left off, Felmet was kind of going through the out damn spot sort of bit. He'd scrubbed and scrubbed his hands trying to get the blood off. I'm on page 34 in my copy. For anyone that's trying to figure out where I'm at. I don't know whether or not, you know, not every printing is going to be the same. But yeah, I'm on midway through page 34. My awesome mug by Ereker. The front door, Smaug, and the Lonely Mountain front gate. So cool. I love that mug. All right. Granny wasn't at home in public houses. She sat stiffly to attention behind her port and lemon, as if it were a shield against the lures of the world. Nanny Og, on the other hand, was enthusiastically downing her third drink, and, Granny thought sourly, was well along that path which would probably end up with her usual dancing on the table, showing her petticoats, and singing "The hedgehog can never be buggered at all." Just like we haven't heard the last of Cripple Mr. Onion, we have not heard the last of the hedgehog can never be buggered at all. The table was covered with copper coins. Vitoler and his wife sat at either end, counting. It was something of a race. Her petticoats, how scandalous. Yep, this is a grandmotherly witch. A little, maybe scandalous. Although, on the other hand, by not Nanny Ogg standards, maybe not so much. Granny, oh, frog in my throat. Ribbit. Granny considered Mrs. Vitoler as she snatched farthings from under her husband's fingers. She was an intelligent-looking woman who appeared to treat her husband much as a sheepdog treats a favorite lamb. The complexities of the marital relationship were known to Granny only from a distance, in the same way that an astronomer can view the surface of a remote and alien world. But it had already occurred to her that a wife to Vitoler would have to be a very special woman, with bottomless reserves of patience and organizational ability, and nimble fingers. Mrs. Vitoler, she said eventually. I apologize if my granny voice is all over the place. I don't remember exactly how Granny sounded. May I make so bold as to ask if your union has been blessed with fruit? The couple looked blank. She means, Nanny Ogg began. No, I see, said Mrs. Vitoler quietly. No. We had a little girl once. A small cloud hung over the table. For a second or two, Vitoler looked merely human-sized and much older. He stared at the small pile of cash in front of him. Only, you see, there is this child, said Granny, indicating the baby in Nanny Ogg's arms. And he needs a home. The Vitolers stared. Then the man sighed. It's no life for a child, he said. Always moving, always a new town, and no room for schooling. They say that's very important these days. But his eyes didn't look away. Mrs. Vitoler said, Why does he need a home? He hasn't got one, said Granny. At least, not one where he would be welcome. The silence continued. Then Mrs. Vitoler said, And you, who ask this, you are by way of being his... Godmothers, said Nanny Ogg promptly. Granny was slightly taken aback. It never would have occurred to her. Vitoler played abstractly with the coins in front of him. His wife reached out across the table and touched his hand, and there was a moment of unspoken communion. Granny looked away. She had grown expert at reading faces, but there were times when she preferred not to. Money is, alas, tight, Vitoler began. But it will stretch, said his wife firmly. Yes, I think it will. We should be happy to take care of him. Oh. Granny nodded. and fished in the deepest recesses of her cloak. At last she produced a small leather bag, which she tipped out onto the table. There was a lot of silver, and even a few tiny gold coins. "This should take care of," she groped, "nappies and such like. Clothes and things. Whatever." "100 times over, I should think," said Vitoller weakly. "Why didn't you mention this before?" "If I'd had to buy you, you wouldn't be worth the price." "But you don't know anything about us," said Mrs. Vitoller. "We don't, do we?" said Granny calmly. "Naturally, we'd like to hear how he gets along. You could send us letters and such like. But it would not be a good idea to talk about all this after you've left, do you see? For the sake of the child." Did everybody see that little butt wiggle from Ben as he left? Mrs. Vitoller looked at the two old women. "There's something else here, isn't there?" she said. "Something big behind all this?" Granny hesitated and then nodded. "But it would do us no good at all to know it?" Another nod. Granny stood up as several actors came in, breaking the spell. Actors had a habit of filling all the space around them. It's kind of true, isn't it? Not all actors are like that, but if you're hanging out with like theater kids, they can get pretty boisterous. Sharky said they caught the tail end of Bin's butt wiggle, pun not originally intended. "I have other things to see to," she said. "Please excuse me." "What's his name?" said Vitoller. "Tom," said Granny, hardly hesitating. "John," said Nanny. The two witches exchanged glances. Granny won. "Tom John," she said firmly, and swept out. Tom John, baby Tom John. She met a breathless Magrat outside the door. "I found a box," she said. "It had all the crowns and things in. So I put it in, like you said, right underneath everything." Parmo says, "Hugh Man." Man's not much of a name. "Good," said Granny. "Our crown looked really tatty compared to the others." "It just goes to show, doesn't it?" said Granny. "Did anyone see you?" "No, everyone was too busy, but—" Magrat hesitated and blushed. "Out with it, girl." "Just after that, a man came up and pinched my bottom." Magrat went a deep crimson and slapped her hand over her mouth. "Did he?" said Granny. "And then what?" And then... "Yes?" He said... "What did he say?" "He said, 'Hello, my lovely, what are you doing tonight?'" Granny ruminated on this for a while, and then she said, Old Goody Whimper, she didn't get out and about much, did she? It was her leg, you know, said Magrat. But she taught you all the midwifery and everything. Oh, yes, that, said Magrat. I done lots. But Granny hesitated, groping her way across unfamiliar territory. She never talked about what you might call the previous. Sorry? You know, said Granny, with an edge of desperation in her voice. Men and such. Magrat looked as if she was about to panic. What about them? Granny Weatherwax had done many unusual things in her time, and it took a lot to make her refuse a challenge. But this time, she gave in. I think, she said helplessly, that it might be a good idea if you have a quiet word with Nanny Og one of these days. Fairly soon. There was a cackle of laughter from the window behind them, a chink of glasses, and a thin voice raised in song. With a giraffe if you stand on a stool, but the hedgehog... Granny stopped listening. Only not just now, she added. With a giraffe if you stand on a stool. But the hedgehog, as you may recall, the title of the song is The Hedgehog Can Never Be Buggered at All. So you can fill in what little blanks there are there about what type of song that is. The troupe got underway a few hours before sunset, their 4 carts lurching off down the road that led toward the Stowe Plains and the big cities. Lancre had a town rule that all mummers, mountebanks, and other potential criminals were outside the gates by sundown. It didn't offend anyone really, because the town had no walls to speak of, and no one much minded if people nipped back in again after dark. It was the look of the thing that counted. Yep. We're kicking you all out. You have to be out of town by dark. You can come back in after, whatever, just don't say anything about it. Farmo says The Hedgehog Can Never Be Buggered at All is about dancing. That's what the song is about. You can dance with a giraffe if you stand on a stool. Yep. You solved it. The witches watched from Magrat's cottage, using Nanny Og's ancient green crystal ball. It's about time you learned how to get sound on this thing, Granny muttered. She gave it a nudge, filling the image with ripples. It was very strange, said Magrat. In those carts, the things they had. Lots of sirens all of a sudden. Oh, I leaned forward slightly and went right out of focus. Sharky say, the Hedgehog song reminds me of a Sandra Boyton book, kids author, so less unseemly, called But Not the Hippopotamus. Yeah, I think that's kind of a... I think Sir Terry was drawing on a certain style, you know? this animal can do this animal can do this animal can do this, but this animal can't do it, kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's a common sort of like plot, I guess. I don't know how to say what I'm thinking. In this case, dancing is what we're definitely talking about that the hedgehog can't do. Right, everyone? Okay. In those carts, the things they had: paper trees and all kinds of costumes, and she waved her hands. There was this great big picture of foreign parts, with all temples and things all rolled up. Foreign, F-O-R-N, foreign parts. It was beautiful. Granny grunted. I thought it was amazing the way all those people became kings and things, didn't you? It was like magic. Magrat Garlic, what are you saying? It was just paint and paper. Anyone could see that. Sharky say, for years of my childhood, adults would snicker about a song from the 70s called the Rodeo Song that I wasn't allowed to listen to until well into my 20s. Consider yourself warned if you go looking. Oh boy. I don't know. Magrat opened her mouth to speak, ran the ensuing argument through her head, and shut it again. Where's Nanny? She said. She's lying out on the lawn, said Granny. She felt a bit poorly. And from outside came the sound of Nanny Ogg being poorly at the top of her voice. I've got a friend that when he gets sick is like that, kind of just, yells it out. Magrat sighed. You know, she said, if we are his godmothers, we ought to have given him 3 gifts. It's traditional. What are you talking about, girl? 3 good witches are supposed to give the baby 3 gifts. You know, like good looks, wisdom, and happiness. Magrat pressed on defiantly. That's how it used to be done in the old days. Oh, you mean gingerbread cottages and all that, said Granny dismissively. Spinning wheels and pumpkins and pricking your finger on rose thorns and similar. I could never be having with all that. She polished the ball reflectively. Yes, but, Magrat said. Granny glanced up at her. That was Magrat for you. Head full of pumpkins. Everyone's fairy godmother for 2 pins. But a good soul underneath it all. Kind to small furry animals. The sort of person who worried about baby birds falling out of nests. Look, if it makes you any happier, she muttered, surprised at herself. She waved her hands vaguely over the image of the departing carts. What's it to be? Wealth? Beauty? Well, money isn't everything, and if he takes after his father, he'll be handsome enough, Magrat said, suddenly serious. Wisdom, do you think? That's something he'll have to learn for himself, said Granny. Perfect eyesight? A good singing voice? From the lawn outside came Nanny Ogg's cracked but enthusiastic voice. telling the night sky that a wizard's staff has a knob on the end. Another song. That one's about magic, right? A wizard's staff has a knob on the end. Nanny Og, everybody. Nanny Og. Sharky say, don't worry about the audience here. The kids are in the other room. What, would the kids not be allowed to know that a wizard's staff has a knob on the end? That's just a normal thing to know about wizards, isn't it? A wizard's staff has a knob on the end. That's just common knowledge, right? The things this book is going to make me say out loud. Not important, said Granny loudly, regarding perfect eyesight, a good singing voice. You've got to think headology, see? Not muck about with all this beauty and wealth business. That's not important. She turned back to the ball and gestured half-heartedly. You'd better go and get Nanny then, seeing as there should be 3 of us. Oh boy, that's going to end well. Nanny was helped in, eventually, and had to have things explained to her. 3 gifts, eh? She said. Haven't done one of them things since I was a girl. It takes me back. What are you doing? Magrat was bustling around the room, lighting candles. Oh, we've got to create the right magical ambiance, she explained. Granny shrugged, but said nothing, even in the face of the extreme provocation. All witches did their magic in their own way, and this was Magrat's house. What are we going to give him, then? Said Nanny. We was just discussing it, said Granny. I know what he'll want, said Nanny. She made a suggestion, which was received in frozen silence. I don't see what use that would be, said Magrat eventually. Wouldn't it be rather uncomfortable? He'll thank us when he grows up, you mark my words, said Nanny. My first husband, he always said. Something a bit less physical is generally the style of things, interrupted Granny, glaring at Nanny Og. Books, Brews, and Booze piping in with no comment from the peanut gallery. Robot Kyo is reevaluating bed knobs and broomsticks. Oh boy. What does everybody think that Nanny Og suggested for a gift? I have no idea for the life of me. Something physical, apparently, that could be uncomfortable. What could it be? I don't know. Uncomfortable, huh? Nope, I'm not sure. Really big eyes, maybe? Farmo says enormous height. Yeah, that could be uncomfortable. Right? Back problems that would lead to. Sharky say huge tracts of land. That would certainly be physical, and it would be uncomfortable in that you'd have to tend to those lands, right? Weeding and such. Lots to look after. There's no need to go and spoil everything, Githa. Why do you always have to? Well, at least I can say that Nanny began. Both voices faded to a mutter. There was a long, edgy silence. I think, said Magrat, with brittle brightness, that perhaps it would be a good idea if we all go back to our little cottages and do it in our own way. You know, separately. It's been a long day, and we're all rather tired. Good idea, said Granny firmly, and stood up. Come, Nanny Og, she snapped. It's been a long day, and we're all rather tired. Magrat heard them bickering as they wandered down the path. She sat, rather sadly, amidst the colored candles, holding a small bottle of extremely thaumaturgical incense that she had ordered from a magical supplies emporium in faraway Ankh-Morpork. She had been rather looking forward to trying it. Sometimes, she thought, it would be nice if people could be a bit kinder. She stared at the ball. Well, she could make a start. He will make friends easily, she whispered. It wasn't much, she knew, but it was something she'd never been able to get the hang of. Oh. Nanny Og, sitting alone in her kitchen with her huge tomcat curled up on her lap, poured herself a nightcap, and through the haze she tried to remember the words of verse 17 of the hedgehog song. There was something about goats, she recalled, but the details eluded her. Time a braided memory. She toasted the invisible presence. A bloody good memory is what he ought to have, she said. He'll always remember the words. Not bad. Good memory, that's a nice one. And Granny Weatherwax, striding home alone through the midnight forest, wrapped her shawl around her and considered. It had been a long day and a trying one. The theater had been the worst part. All people pretending to be other people. Things happening that weren't real. Bits of countryside you could put your foot through. Granny liked to know where she stood. She wasn't certain she stood for that sort of thing. The world seemed to be changing all the time. It didn't used to change so much. It was bewildering. She walked quickly through the darkness with the frank stride of someone who was at least certain that the forest, on this damp and windy night, contained strange and terrible things. And she was it. Let him be whoever he thinks he is, she said. That's all anybody could hope for in this world. Like most people, witches are unfocused in time. The difference is that they dimly realize it and make use of it. They cherish the past because part of them is still living there, and they can see the shadows the future casts before it. Granny could feel the shape of the future, and it had knives in it. I find Magrat and Nanny Og's gifts pretty sweet because they're both thinking of things that they don't have that they wish they had and giving them to this boy. I don't think... It's hard to interpret. Like, Granny's is Granny's is difficult to interpret exactly what it means, isn't it? Books, Brews, and Booze says that's a good ending line for that section. She could feel the shape of the future, and it had knives in it. Yeah, that's ominous, isn't it? That's the kind of line to give you chills. But yeah, Magrat wishing for him to be able to make friends easily because she'd never been able to make friends easily. Nanny Og wishing for him to have a good memory because her memory is slipping. And Granny wishing for him to be whoever he thinks he is. That's an interesting wish, isn't it? That's one of those... It could be a monkey paw wish. Well, no, that's not quite right, because monkey paw wishes are always evil. Like, bad wishes. This is more of a, like... You know, it's like... I hope you get everything you deserve. Right? It's like that. Whatever that means, it could be good or bad. Sharky's interpreted that Granny wants a world that's less pretentious, so she gifts him integrity. I don't know. She was thinking about the world and how it was changing and how she didn't know where she stood in it. But what she said is let him be whoever he thinks he is. I don't know. That, to me, that could mean... That could fluctuate. That could mean different things. Farmouse says, I think that's maybe what she intends. Well, hopefully he won't grow up with low self-esteem, Farmouse, because he's going to make friends easily. Books, Brews, and Booze says, so if you think you are a bad person, you will be a bad person? Yeah. Yeah, you know, maybe. I guess it depends on exactly how literal that wish goes. Whatever he thinks he is, not whatever he thinks he could be or will be. I don't know. I guess we'll probably find out. As Farmo says, we shall have to see. Alright, it's 7:53. Let's see how long this next section is. Okay, well, I'll get past that. It began at 5 the next morning. I guess the knives. 4 men rode through the woods near Granny's cottage, tethered the horses out of earshot, and crept, very cautiously, through the mists. The sergeant in charge was not happy in his work. He was a Ramtops man. The Ramtops, if you recall, are the mountain range, the Ramtop Mountains. He was a Ramtops man and wasn't at all certain about how you went about arresting a witch. He was pretty certain, though, that the witch wouldn't like the idea. He didn't like the idea of a witch not liking the idea. The men were Ramtoppers as well. They were following him very closely, ready to duck behind him at the first sign of anything more unexpected than a tree. Granny's cottage was a fungoid shape in the mist. Her unruly herb garden seemed to move, even in the still air. It contained plants seen nowhere else in the mountains. Their roots and seeds traded across 5,000 miles of the Discworld, and the sergeant could swear that 1 or 2 blooms turned toward him. He shuddered. "What now, Sarge?" We spread out," he said. "Yes, we spread out. That's what we do." They moved carefully through the bracken. The sergeant crouched behind a handy log and said, "Right, very good. You've got the general idea. Now, let's spread out again, and this time we spread out separately." The men grumbled a bit, but disappeared into the mist. The sergeant gave them a few minutes to take up positions, then said, "Right, now we—" He paused. He wondered whether he dared shout, and decided against it. He stood up, he removed his helmet to show respect, and sidled through the damp grass to the back door. He knocked, very gently. After a wait of several seconds, he clamped his helmet back on his head, said, "No one in, blast," and started to stride away. The door opened. It opened very slowly and with the maximum amount of creak. Simple neglect wouldn't have caused that depth of groan. You'd need careful work with hot water over a period of weeks. I love that implication that Granny has intentionally warped her door to make it as creaky as possible. The sergeant stopped and then turned around very slowly while contriving to move as few muscles as possible. He had mixed feelings about the fact that there was nothing in the doorway. In his experience, doors didn't just open themselves. He cleared his throat nervously. Granny Weatherwax, right by his ear, said, "That's a nasty cough you've got there. You did right in coming to me." The sergeant looked up at her with an expression of mad gratitude. He said, "Argle." How long is this next bit? I don't want to get into a section that's too long. At this point, it's going to go on for, another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so pages. What do we think? Should I do this next bit? Another 6 or so pages? Where's everyone at? It is 7:58, so I've only been reading for about 40 minutes or so. Not a long one. Sharkies are in, Books, Brews, and Booze is in. I'm gonna go for it. Okay, let's go. "She did what?" said the Duke. The sergeant stared fixedly at an area a few inches to the right of the Duke's chair. "She give me a cup of tea, sir," he said. "And what about your men?" "She give them one too, sir." One too. I am tired, but I'll get through this next section. It's fun. It's a fun book. The Duke rose from his chair. I feel like I'm getting his voice not quite right. Maybe a little more nasally and a little higher. The Duke rose from his chair and put his arms around the sergeant's rusting chainmail shoulders. He was in a bad mood. He had spent half the night washing his hands. He kept thinking that something was whispering in his ear. His breakfast oatmeal had been served up too salty and roasted with an apple in it, and my copy says the crook had hysterics in the kitchen, but I think it's supposed to say cook. I'm going to guess it's the cook had hysterics in the kitchen. You could tell the Duke was extremely annoyed. He was polite. The Duke was the kind of man who becomes more and more agreeable as his temper drains away, until the point is reached where the words, "Thank you so much," have the cutting edge of a guillotine. "Sergeant," he said, walking the man slowly across the floor. "Sir?" "I'm not sure I made your orders clear, Sergeant," said the Duke in snake tones. Books, Brews, and Booze copy says crook as well. It's got to be a typo, right? It's got to say cook. They've talked about the cook before. "Sir, I mean, it is possible I may have confused you. I meant to say, bring me a witch in chains if necessary. But perhaps what I really said was, go and have a cup of tea. Was this, in fact, the case?" Bear is asking if the cook is a crook. We don't have any evidence to indicate that the cook is a crook, other than this line that says the crook went into hysterics in the kitchen. So, all three copies say crook. I guess it's probably one of those things, it's a word, and maybe it's just got glossed over by the editors because the sentence could make sense out of context. Was this in fact the case? The sergeant wrinkled his forehead. Sarcasm had not hitherto entered his life. His experience of people being annoyed with him generally involved shouting and occasional bits of wood. "No, sir," he said. "I wonder why, then, you did not, in fact, do this thing that I asked?" "Sir?" "I expect she said some magic words, did she? I've heard about witches," said the Duke, who had spent the night before reading, until his bandaged hands shook too much, some of the more excitable works on the subject. "I imagine she offered you visions of unearthly delight?" "Did she show you," the Duke shuddered, "dark fascinations and forbidden raptures, the like of which mortal men should not even think of, and demonic secrets that took you to the depths of man's desires?" What book was he reading? For research purposes. The Duke sat down and fanned himself with his handkerchief. "Are you all right, sir?" said the sergeant. "What? Oh, perfectly, perfectly. Only you've gone all red." I wonder if his book had illustrations. "Don't change the subject, man," snapped the Duke, pulling himself together a bit. "Admit it. She offered you hedonistic and licentious pleasures, known only to those who dabble in the carnal arts, didn't she? Whew. Getting the vapors. Oh, asterisk regarding the book. I completely missed it. Footnote. There was a footnote about the more excitable works on the subject. The more excitable works on the subject, footnote, written by wizards who are celibate and get some pretty funny ideas around 4 o'clock in the morning. End of footnote. Wizards writing erotic fan fiction about witches. I mean, that's not how anybody else would view this topic, I'm sure. But she offered you hedonistic and licentious pleasures known only to those who dabble in the carnal arts, didn't she? The sergeant stood to attention and stared straight ahead. No, sir, he said in the manner of one speaking the truth, come what may. She offered me a bun. A bun? Yes, sir. It had currants in it. Felmet sat absolutely still while he fought for internal peace. Finally, all he could manage was, "And what did your men do about this?" "They had a bun too, sir. All except young Roger, who isn't allowed fruit, sir, on account of his trouble." The Duke sagged back on the window seat and put his hand over his eyes. I feel like I just did that. I was born to rule down on the plains, he thought, where it's all flat and there isn't all this weather and everything, and there are people who don't appear to be made of dough. He's going to tell me what this Roger had. He had a biscuit, sir. He had a biscuit, sir. The Duke stared out at the trees. He was angry. He was extremely angry. But 20 years of marriage to Lady Felmet had taught him not simply to control his emotions, but to control his instincts as well. And not so much as the twitching of a muscle indicated the workings of his mind. Besides, arising out of the black depths of his head was an emotion that, hitherto, he had a little time for. I'm guessing, again, this is just supposed to be had little time for. Not had a little time for. Curiosity was flashing a fin. The Duke had managed quite well for 50 years without finding a use for curiosity. Yeah. It was not a trait much encouraged in aristocrats. He had found certainty was a much better bet. However, it occurred to him that for once, curiosity might have its uses. The sergeant was standing in the middle of the floor with the stolid air of one who was awaiting a word of command, and who is quite prepared to wait until continental drift budges him from his post. He had been in the undemanding service of the kings of Lancre for many years, and it showed. His body was standing to attention. Despite all efforts, his stomach stood at ease. The Duke's gaze fell on the fool, who was sitting on his stool by the throne. The hunched figure looked up, embarrassed, and gave his bells a half-hearted shake. The Duke reached a decision. The way to progress, he'd found, was to find weak spots. He tried to shut away the thought that these included such things as a king's kidneys at the top of a dark stairway, and concentrated on the matter in hand. Hand. He'd scrubbed and scrubbed, but it seemed to have no effect. Eventually, he'd gone down to the dungeons and borrowed one of the torturer's wire brushes, and scrubbed with that too. That had no effect either. It made it worse. The harder he scrubbed, the more blood there was. He was afraid he might go mad. He wrestled the thought to the back of his mind. Weak spots. That was it. The fool looked all weak spot. "You may go, Sergeant." "Sir," said the sergeant, and marched out stiffly. Bear finds the curiosity bit odd. How can you be certain of things without being initially curious of it? Well, if you're an aristocrat, you just do it. You bypass the curiosity and just go straight for being certain about everything you do. Because you're an aristocrat. So if you're doing something, it's probably correct, right? Fool. "Marry, sir," said the fool nervously, and gave his hated mandolin a quick strum. The Duke sat down on the throne. "I am already extremely married," he said. "Advise me, my fool." "I'faith, nuncle," said the fool. "Nor am I thy nuncle. I feel sure I would have remembered," said Lord Felmet, leaning down until the prow of his nose was a few inches from the fool's stricken face. "If you preface your next remark with nuncle, i'faith, or marry, it will go hard with you." The fool moved his lips silently, and then said, "How do you feel about prithee?" The Duke knew when to allow some slack. "Prithee I can live with," he said. "So can you. But no capering." He grinned encouragingly. "How long have you been a fool, boy?" "Prithee, sirrah." "The sirrah," said the Duke, holding up a hand. "On the whole, I think not." "Prithee, sirrah." "Sir," said the fool, and swallowed nervously. "All my life, sir. 17 years under the bladder, man and boy, and my father before me, and my nuncle at the same time as him, and my granddad before them, and his—" "Your whole family have been fools?" "Family tradition, sir," said the fool. "Prithee, I mean." The Duke smiled again, and the fool was too worried to notice how many teeth it contained. "You come from these parts, don't you?" said the Duke. Yes, sir." "So, you would know all about the native beliefs and so on." "I suppose so, sir. Prithee." "Good. Where do you sleep, my fool?" "In the stables, sir." "From now on, you may sleep in the corridor outside my room," said the Duke, beneficently. "Gosh!" "And now," said the Duke, his voice dripping across the fool like treacle over a pudding. Tell me about witches. I feel like Sir Terry uses the word treacle quite frequently. I feel like it comes up once or twice a book, treacle, which is more often than I would expect to encounter that word. Farmos thinks it's just treacle. 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 Could be. It's definitely not a word that I use myself frequently. Bear says, quite the upgrade, stable to hallway floor. And the Sharkies think it's used much more in British baking than in North American. Yeah, I do think it's more of a British thing in general. I don't know if it's enough of a British thing to get used as frequently as I feel like it does in Discworld books. Maybe it is. Maybe it's more of a common cultural thing. Maybe things drip like treacle more regularly over there, across the pond. Marmo says, unless you're talking about the plural, and then you want to pronounce it like Heracles. Triacles. Let's see. I'm going to read 2 more pages, well, 1 page front and back, to kind of get us out of the castle again. That night, the fool slept on good royal flagstones in the whistling corridor above the great hall, instead of the warm, stuffy straw of the stables. This is foolish, he told himself. Marry, but is it foolish enough? He dozed off fitfully into some sort of dream where a vague figure kept trying to attract his attention, and was only dimly aware of the voices of Lord and Lady Felmet on the other side of the door. It's certainly a lot less drafty, said the Duchess grudgingly. I appreciate... Okay, so first of all, is that implying that they're using the fool to, like, block the draft from coming under the door? And second of all, I love the, like, he's sleeping on flagstones instead of the warm, stuffy straw of the stables. Like, yes, this is clearly a downgrade from his previous accommodations. As Farmos is saying. The Duke sat back in the armchair and smiled at his wife. Well, she demanded, where are the witches? The Chamberlain would appear to be right, beloved. The witches seem to have the local people in thrall. The sergeant of the guard came back empty-handed. He came down heavily on the importunate thought. You must have him executed, she said promptly, to make an example to the others. A course of action, my dear, which ultimately results in us ordering the last soldier to cut his own throat as an example to himself. You know, I feel like that's the first thing he said that I respect. Oh, the Duchess said it was less drafty. The Duchess says that it is less drafty. So I think that that's because they are using the fool as basically an insulation, like blocking the wind from coming under the door. Because He dozed off fitfully, the fool, dozed off fitfully into the sort of dream where a vague figure kept trying to attract his attention, and was only dimly aware of the voices of Lord and Lady Felmet on the other side of the door. "It's certainly a lot less draughty," said the Duchess grudgingly. The Duke sat back in his armchair and smiled at his wife. But yes, a course of action, my dear, which ultimately results in us ordering the last soldier to cut his own throat as an example to himself. I like that. I think that's very succinct. Which line? The one I just repeated as you were asking, or a different one? The one that... yes. Because she said that you must have the sergeant executed to make an example to the others. A course of action, my dear, which ultimately results in us ordering the last soldier to cut his own throat as an example to himself. By the way, he added mildly, there would appear to be somewhat fewer servants around the place. You know I would not normally interfere. Then don't, she snapped. Housekeeping is under my control. I cannot abide slackness. I'm sure you know best, but what of the witches? Will you stand idly by and let trouble seed for the future? Will you let these witches defy you? What of the crown? The Duke shrugged. No doubt it ended in the river, he said. And the child? He was given to the witches? Do they do human sacrifice? It would appear not, said the Duke. Hi, puppy. Hi. Don't worry, I'm almost done, okay? Almost done. Do they do human sacrifice? It would appear not, said the Duke. The Duchess looked vaguely disappointed. These witches, said the Duke. Apparently they seem to cast a spell on people. Well, obviously, not like a magic spell. They seem to be respected. They do medicine and so on. It's rather strange. The mountain people seem to be afraid of them and proud of them at the same time. It might be a little difficult to move against them. I could come to believe, said the Duchess darkly, that they have cast a glamour over you as well. In fact, the Duke was intrigued. Power was always darkly fascinating, which was why he had married the Duchess in the first place. I'm sure you can all hear Pepper crunching away, finishing off his dinner, which he'd left before. He stared fixedly at the fire. In fact, said the Duchess, who recognized the malign smile, you like it, don't you? The thought of the danger. I remember when we were married. All that business with the knotted rope. Whoa. This book. Sir Terry's swinging for the cages. She snapped her fingers in front of the Duke's glazed eyes. He sat up. Not at all, he shouted. Then what will you do? Wait. Wait? Wait and consider. Patience is a virtue. The Duke sat back. The smile he smiled could have spent 1,000,000 years sitting on a rock. And then, just below one eye, he started to twitch. Blood was oozing between the bandages on his hand. We made it to page 48. So I think that was a good, 14 pages, wasn't it? Yeah, we started on page 34. Yeah, I do think that the text in these books, the kerning is a little larger. It's all... So I think the pages pass a little quicker. It's slightly less dense of a book. So we'll probably get through it a little faster as well, overall. Because it's not that long either. It's only 265 pages. So, we had a lot of suggestiveness tonight in the book. Between a variety of, a couple of different songs and books. Chuck, you say when we're not stopping to laugh. Some theories about how witches go about beguiling people. And a little bit of information about the Duke and Duchess's wedding night. Honestly, a little more information than I think I needed. Heavy on the implications. You know, danced around a lot of topics in a very... Danced explicitly around a lot of topics, I think, you know? Not subtle, but not outright saying anything. Oh boy. And apparently Magrat needs to have a talk with Nanny Og to sort a few things out. Well, that's that. So, yeah, I've got a busy day tomorrow, but I will be here on Friday, same time, 7 p.m. Pacific. And we'll continue. We'll go straight back to, we'll rejoin the witches. Let's see. Yeah, back to Granny. Everyone still enjoying themselves with this book? Sesame. Chucky say absolutely. Took a little bit for me to get my stride, I think, tonight because, like I said before, tired, so I needed to kind of get into the swing of things. Norma says sesame is squishy. Squish, 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 squish. It's okay. Speaking of books, brews, and booze, I hope your precious gets through the kidney troubles all right. I'm sorry to hear that Kitty's having some health issues, but hopefully it's all sortable. Hopefully the vets take care of things. And yeah, I will return on Friday. So I hope everybody has a lovely evening. Does anybody have a suggestion for someone for me to raid out to? Sharky say Granny was wandering a bit into Gandalf/Mr. Wolf territory. Granny's voice is a little tricky because I am not at all trying to make Granny sound feminine. Because I don't think that I could do Granny justice if I tried to. So I'm settling for more of a weathered, crotchety sounding woman, despite the fact that that's not exactly how she is described. Alright, well, I am tired and hungry, so I think I'm going to call it there. We're going to have some spaghetti for dinner tonight. So, have a lovely evening, everyone. Have a good rest of your week. And hopefully I'll see you all on Friday. Yeah. Good night.